Welcome to Success in Brief with your host, Rosanne Felicello. In every episode, we feature successful women attorneys and other business professionals to reflect on what career advice would you give your younger self. We hope to provide insights and inspiration toward your professional success. You can find this show at www.felicellolaw.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Success in Brief, Rosanne Felicello.
Hello, my name is Rosanne Felicello, and this is Success in Brief. I'm thrilled today to welcome Amy Serino to the podcast. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning, Rosanne. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm so thrilled to finally be able to reconnect with you. It's been, I think, a few decades since we've...
A couple decades, yes. Thank you very much for having me.
Amy is an employment attorney and workplace investigator, which we'll find out more about, in the greater Boston area. And Amy and I met at Ropes and Gray many years ago. We both started our law practice. After stints as a law clerk on the First Circuit and in several smaller firms, Amy has recently started her own law practice, which we'll also find out about today. So I'm excited to introduce you to Amy and for her to share her story of success. Amy, again, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So what was your path to becoming an attorney? Did you always know that's what you wanted to be?
I think I did on some level. I did. My father was an attorney, and his brother and his father, so my grandfather, were also attorneys in Massachusetts. And so I sort of grew up in one of the, some people there are no attorney families or some attorney families. I was definitely in an attorney family. And I also grew up outside of the Washington, D.C. area. So it's super common for people to be attorneys, whether or not they're practicing like in a traditional law firm setting or they're working for a government agency. So attorneys were everywhere for me growing up.
That's interesting that you point that out. Yeah, I didn't grow up with any attorneys in my family.
Yeah.
I think there are the two paths. Either you're surrounded by them or you have no experience with it.
And I was really encouraged to pursue it by my father, who thought it was a great background. I love to write. And he said, that's fine. You can love to write, but you should try and going to law school. It will prepare you for writing. It will prepare you for any other kind of career, business, real estate, politics, any of those things.
And have you found that to be true?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the skills that you get from law school and the practice of law are analytical skills that transfer into other things. And principally, my career has been the law, but I think that the kind of the skills that I took away do extend into other work as well.
I think that's definitely true. And I think that the analytical skills that it gives you really help you just navigate the modern world.
That's right. Yes.
So having your dad and your uncle and your grandfather, that must all in the law field must have been amazing for you in order to have those resources. Did you find that you turned to them often as you were navigating your career path?
Well, yes. I mean, definitely my father was a big influence early in my career. He's passed, but had been a great champion of going to law school and encouraging it. My uncles to some degree as well. And I didn't, only knew my grandfather as a little child, but, sort of grew up in the shadow of them and the respect they gave to the profession. So it was something that I always knew was, treated with respect and was something to aspire to.
So you mentioned that you grew up in the D.C. area. I saw that you actually went to law school in D.C., George Washington. So what brought you to the Boston area?
It was someplace I'd always wanted to live. Both of my parents are from New England. And so we'd spent a good deal of time in the Boston area growing up, all of the holidays and so forth, and in Boston with family. So it was actually a reconnecting to family to move to Boston, because my childhood had been shaped by my father starting out at the Department of Justice and working at other government agencies growing up. So that had been we had been sort of transplanted to DC. It was a homecoming to come to Boston.
That sounds wonderful. I knew that I wanted to go to Boston for college for no reason, really. I mean, I think I read about it in books and had seen it. I hadn't ever visited there until I started looking at colleges. But I just got something in my head that Boston was, where I wanted to go to school. And
it's charming, isn't it?
It's very charming. I had a wonderful time there. I was in Boston for about 11 years, actually, with undergrad, law school, and starting out at Ropes, practicing for several years before returning to the New York area. But yeah, I mean, it is a great town.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So what, you started out at Ropes, we mentioned. So what were the factors that drove you to make the decision to go to Ropes as your initial foray into law practice?
Yeah. I mean, it's a well-known and well-respected firm and well-resourced. And really, I felt like I wouldn't be shutting any doors to go to Ropes. It could never hurt to have a big law experience. And obviously it's always the draw of the money that's associated with a big law practice. But really, I was interested in the training, and I felt like it was a place that would invest in new lawyers and had the capacity to do that. And it proved to be true. It really was an incredible experience. And when I started there, I was pretty exclusively working on complex commercial litigation, and it was a great experience.
You were there during the time when they were working on the World Trade Center gearing up for trial, right?
I did not. No, I did not. I did do insurance type work at some points during my time there, but I was not heavily involved in that. No.
So the employment law, did you have any experience with that at Ropes, or was that something that came out later?
A little bit, but it was more there were people who would straddle litigation and employment law when I was there. I had some work that intersected with employment, and I always really wanted to do more employment law. So that was something that I was looking for the future, to see how I could work that more into my practice. And that was something I was ultimately able to do.
That's great. After Ropes, though, you didn't go right into employment law. You went to the clerk for the First Circuit, right?
That's right.
That sounds like an amazing experience. How did that?
It was amazing. I was thinking about trying something new and different, and I had a great opportunity fall into my lap in some ways. My judge, who I went to clerk for, had just been appointed and was needing clerks immediately. So unlike many clerkships, and especially federal clerkships, which can be, as you know, these roles can be filled years in advance. This was something that was almost like just walking into a job interview, to work immediately. And so I worked for 2 years for my judge in the First Circuit, Judge Jeffrey Howard. And it was an incredible experience. And I think, and there were a lot more litigators and other attorneys who were taking a detour to clerk, who, typically the traditional trajectory is that you go to law school, you clerk, and then you go start at a firm, for those who go into private practice. And I was finding a lot more colleagues were doing what I was doing, and they were practicing for a little bit, going to a clerkship, and then deciding what next. And I have to think that I definitely appreciated seeing behind the scenes in a way that I don't know if I would have as somebody who came straight from law school. It was really an incredible experience to see what was happening in the background and really just get a chance to be a student of the law again.
It seems fascinating to be able to be in that role. After having practiced also for a few years, you really have a different perspective, I think, of the cases coming in and how the sausage is made in the background.
That's right. Absolutely.
When you went to the clerkship, did you expect that you would return to big law, or did you know going in that you thought you'd want a different path after the clerkship?
I thought that I knew that I would probably want a different path. And in fact, it was cute. I was even asked if I would like to come back to Ropes. They said they'd give me a clerkship bonus if I could commit then that I'd come back. And I said, no, I really have to try other things. So I didn't want to accept that, and without having in my heart being in it to return. So certainly left on happy terms from Ropes, but was wanting to try something new and different. And that the years of clerking gave me a chance to sort of keep an eye on what was going on in the Boston legal market and find something else.
And when you were clerking, were you exposed to lots of different types of law?
Yeah, the whole gamut. And particularly for somebody who'd been in private practice, doing exclusively civil litigation, I didn't touch any criminal cases, and it was very interesting to see criminal appeals.
So how did you make the decision what you would do after your clerkship? Where did you decide to go?
I found a really exciting opportunity for myself. I worked at a medium size. So I'd gone from Ropes, which was hundreds of lawyers, to more of a medium sized firm, which is between 50 and 100 lawyers during my time there with Prince Lobel in Boston. And there I was able to continue doing commercial litigation, but also blend in employment law and blend in a very important interest of mine, which was media law. So I was able to do pre-publication review of print, typically journalism, before it went to press to review for libel and so forth. And that I'd always had I was an undergrad, I was a journalism major, and I'd always had an interest in that. That was how my interest in writing had sort of manifested in my educational background. And it was an incredibly exciting thing to do. And I've had a couple of dream jobs, and that was one of them. So I've been fortunate that, that it's not just stayed one thing. And things have evolved, and what I've been looking for has changed over time and with my life and demands. And that was a dream job, being able to do those three types of law together, and definitely strengthen my interest and expertise in employment law during that time.
That's fascinating. The libel sounds very interesting.
Yeah, and it has practical applications in what I do today. So it's, you really have to be able to stand behind everything that you write and pull it apart and scrutinize it if it were to go to trial. And so it was a skill that I was able to develop and continue to rely upon today.
So you had this dream job, and then at some point decided to move elsewhere. That was no longer your job. So where'd you go next, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, and I think this is something you've mentioned before on a prior podcast. I'll unapologetically say that part of my decision was life needing to make changes that were consistent with what my lifestyle was, which is that I had two kids that I was raising, and I found a job that was I've gone my 50 to 100 attorney firm to a 4-person firm locally, so no commute, so in an office but no commute, and doing the same caliber of work that I'd been doing, basically the same level of employment litigation and employment counseling in Boston, but on a much smaller scale and without the commute. So it was a fantastic, next step for me. And it spanned the period when my kids were toddlers to now teenagers.
I think it's critical that, you're able to use your law degree to make the life that you want at that moment that you want it.
Yes. It may not be the same life the whole way through. It won't be the same life.
It won't be. We go through transitions in life and periods of life, and your kids won't always be in diapers, and they won't always want you to hold them, for hours on end. So you need to make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually think that a law degree is unique in that way, and that it really does offer that if you allow yourself to sort of think outside the box about what your career looks like.
I agree. And I think it can be a mistake to have a set thing in mind that this is what my dream is, and to feel that since you've told people this, or that you've set your life up this way, that you have to follow through with it, because you wanted it before, that you have to want it now. Things change over time, and I think that's real life, and you'll be happier if you're able to be flexible.
I think that's definitely true. I feel like that's one of those. There used to be signs on the New York subway advertising, I think it was like theories of life or something, how to be happy. And one of their statements of how to be happy is, one, be flexible about what makes you happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can allow yourself to find that satisfaction in different ways, I think it really does make life a little bit more enjoyable.
Yeah.
So the 4-person law firm sounds like it was great.
It was wonderful.
It
was all women too.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So you all understood the sort of what you were dealing with in terms of the children and needing to leave, and times for soccer practice or whatever.
That's right.
Is that the job you had immediately before starting your practice?
That's where I came from. Yes, before I started this firm.
So what made you decide that you wanted to go from 4 to 1?
To 1? I felt like I was ready for it. And I wanted to sort of have more freedom to sort of explore where I wanted to focus my time. And this format of being my own firm has left me more flexibility, I think, to even explore myself and my career, independent of being an employee or a person working at a firm. And I've been able to be more open to, how else can I enrich my career and my life in terms of volunteering and other things that I'm just starting to get more involved in. Just starting to crack the book on that.
That's very interesting. That
yeah.
I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I think that's definitely true. Once you're the person making all decisions about, how much money do I need to make this year? How much do I have to spend? How much time do I have to devote to this practice? You really can free up your time to do other things that are important to you as well.
Yeah, it's more profitable in some ways, and it frees me up in that way. And obviously, client needs are the absolute number one. But otherwise, outside of that, it's very rare that a client absolutely has to have something at a particular time that's inflexible, especially in the kind of work that I do. And so, other than that, I'm the master of my own time, which I really like.
I think that having that freedom is another one of those elements of being happy. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Autonomy. So you made that decision to leave to start your practice just recently, sort of as we're coming out of the pandemic. Do you think the pandemic itself shaped that decision in any way, or had any?
Yeah, it did. I definitely sort of reframed what level of happiness I could have working more independently, because I did do it for so long during the pandemic. But also it sort of boosted my ability to do the kind of work that I'm doing now, which is principally workplace investigations, because it went from, and we can talk more about what it involves, but it previously had been all in-person work. And now the standard is well accepted that we might have meetings remotely. And that could be, meetings in different cities across the country on the same day. And it does so, instead of being out of commission for an entire day for a particular matter, I can work on more than one investigation at a time now. I just have to, I obviously have to keep everything straight, and I do. But I can have more than one investigation on my desk because I can be anywhere and meet with people across the country all during the day at times that are convenient to them now, instead of me just like setting up a schedule in somebody's conference room and trying to fit everybody in.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is to be a workplace investigator? Like what kind of investigations are you doing? Are you wearing a trench coat? Like, what is it?
I'll tell you what I know. I'll try and do the field justice, because it's a pretty interesting area of work. And sometimes it's an area of law and sometimes it's not. But basically, I am, and I consider it employment law adjacent. I am asked by an employer or employer's counsel is often more common, to come in to assess something that has come up. That's typically it's an employee complaint about another employee, or employee complaint about a manager, for instance. And so that's the typical framework, is that some complaint has arisen. And it could be any number of things. A very common scenario would be an allegation of sexual harassment, or an allegation of discrimination in a promotion, that kind of thing, or some combination of these things, and a claim of retaliation, that once I complained to my manager, then I was no longer getting these, I was no longer included on these sales calls, or something like that. So the need for an investigator, there are various reasons why an investigator might be helpful or necessary. And a typical scenario would be that either that the situation is extremely sensitive, extremely explosive, where they feel like they just need somebody with some expertise to come in and speak with people who will be sensitive, who will have good judgment, who will be independent, that kind of thing. But another common time this will arise is when the person who either would be conducting the investigation otherwise, like a human resources person, or to whom a report of this nature would typically be delivered, like a senior leadership, a CEO, a board of directors, those kinds of people, when they're named in action. So, it's a conflict for the person, for the investigation to be conducted internally. And there might be a conflict how this is going to be reported out. So bringing in a third party is beneficial, because you can sort of eliminate some of that conflict and bring a level of expertise. And ultimately, an employer is looking to have something that they can rely upon that's good information, but also shows that they cared and were willing to listen to multiple points of view, and they wanted somebody who had a complaint to be adequately heard. So that's what my role is in conducting an investigation, and it's very important to bring good judgment, thoroughness, and open-mindedness to the process, and not strictly be looking at this as like an employment lawyer hat, like I'm not the employer's counsel. I'm expressly not that. That's why my best source of referrals is other employment lawyers, because they want to retain that confidential attorney-client relationship, and they do not want to be the one on the stand.
Oh, interesting. So are you called upon to testify in your role?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the expectation for any engagement, that I might be called upon to testify, and I have testified in the past. So, which is eye-opening once you've spent a lot of your career preparing witnesses for deposition or for trial. It's quite a role reversal to be that person.
It's very interesting because it seems a little bit different than the securities law type investigations that we often do, where you're called upon to do the investigation, but you're called upon as the attorney to do the investigation and to protect the privilege of the company. So that's an interesting difference.
Yeah. I consider any of my investigations as potentially subject to privilege, and that I would treat with the same level of confidentiality as an investigation like that, but also know that one of the defenses, for instance, in a claim of discrimination or harassment or retaliation, is prompt remedial action taken by the employer. And so it may be in an employer's interest to expose, here are all the steps that we took. Mm-hmm. And here's everything that Amy saw, and here's everything that Amy considered, and here's the output. And this is why we relied on it, and we thought it was reasonable to do so. So, it is something that's potentially, for which the client may potentially want to waive a privilege.
It's very interesting. How did you first get involved in that type of work?
It was a natural outgrowth of employment law work. So, when we would be representing an employer on, I don't know how many countless occasions, I would be essentially conducting an investigation when a complaint would come in, like a charge with the state agency or the EEOC. So I would be doing a lot of the same steps, but through an advocate's lens. So I'd be speaking to the extent that it was feasible, often not, I'd be speaking with the person who complained, but also, the manager involved and the other people witnessed it, and sort of following the same process. So that was something that I developed as a employment law skill, and, drew upon some of my background and my interest in journalism and the kind of work that I described before, where you're sort of vetting every fact that you receive and make sure that it's true when you write it down. So it was a natural outgrowth of all of my interests, which include writing and this sort of detailed approach to fact finding.
Like the journalism skills.
Yeah, absolutely. The interview skills, and deposition, that kind of thing.
It seems very interesting. And how do you go about you mentioned a moment ago that some of your best resources are other employment lawyers. So how do you go about sort of networking that, and also making it clear that you are not a sort of competitive threat?
Yeah. Well, it is a relationship business. It is something that, when somebody is looking for a workplace investigator, they have to find somebody with good judgment and somebody who they trust. And that doesn't mean that they trust that they're going to get a particular outcome. And if they did, that would make them a horrible workplace investigator, but trust that they will give something a fair shake. And so I began my name became sort of spreading out within some large employment law firms. And so it was not just, the Boston office, but, it was other branches of that national law firm's offices and multiple law firms in that category. And so you really live and die by the quality of your work, because it is referrals, it's internal referrals within law firms, or, that a client will ask their lawyer for a name, and the lawyer will ask around at their firm and get multiple names, and you may be one of multiple. So what is your history, and have you proven to have good judgment and produced quality work product thoroughly, efficiently, and with good principles and best practices in mind.
Is there a time frame for how long these investigations tend to take, or is it really dependent on the facts and circumstances of each one?
It's more the latter. I would say that almost never is it a case that it's like a matter of days, although there's exceptions to the rule. So if it's really, did somebody, commit this one physical act, and I can talk with everybody involved, I can have an oral finding for the company within a day or two. And now things are more flexible, where it used to be require travel and things like that. Like, it can be more efficient. And I can slot in, where CFO is traveling, but they can meet with me by Zoom. I can now fit in things that were impractical before to be more efficient. But you're ultimately working around people's schedules, and it may be that they want me to do something, but they want to wait until this board meeting in 3 weeks. So can you stop and go? And that's part of why it seems being able to do things remotely has worked out well, because I can't just drop everything. If it was a matter of being on hand and physically present. But I am to some extent following the client's pace. It's always important to address things as efficiently as possible, while not sacrificing any quality of the work. And there will be a case where somebody is being held out of the workplace until there is a finding about whether they did X, Y, and Z. And that has to be given a certain level of urgency, because you can't hold people indefinitely out of work.
Yeah, it's like their livelihood, right? And
yeah,
are they usually paid during that time?
It depends on the employer's approach. But larger employers sometimes have more resources to do that, and some employers will put somebody off pending results. And if the person's reinstated with no issue, they're compensated. And some, and if they're let go, then it's there's no compensation. Ultimately, when I'm acting as a workplace investigator, I usually I would have nothing to do with that. I would leave that to my employment law colleagues. And you would ask, how do I, sort of keep the trust for referrals? And I'm certainly well aware of what my role is, and that it's strictly to be a fact finder when I'm engaged to do something like this. There can be times when I'm asked by the lawyer, or less common, but if just a client retains me directly, they might say, can you do an investigation, and can you give us some recommendations that would involve legal advice? But those circumstances are really well defined, because I want to be clear what my role is. And most of the time I'm strictly engaged to be a fact finder. And it's not in my interest to undermine, to overstep, and to undermine the employment lawyer, existing employment lawyer's role. And so I'm pretty clear about what my role is. And I think that is something also that other lawyers respect.
You sometimes are hired just as an employment lawyer also.
Oh, yes. Right? Yeah. And that's sort of where I started, where I grew from.
And is that usually on the employer side, or do you also represent?
It is. It's typically on the employer side. And I now would, do much less in the way of litigation. It's more in the way of advice on typical workplace problems or issues that just simply need to be navigated. An employer just wants to know, what is the right thing to do? I've got this person that's on a leave of absence. I don't even know what their status is. They just haven't been at work. And we have to sort out, what are they entitled to by law? What, does the employer go further in its policies? And let's make sure that that the employee is getting that.
And have you found sort of instances of harassment or discrimination going up now that people are back in the office? Or what are the trends that you've seen in this area?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, certainly the things that are more typical of in-person interactions have gone down. I used to joke that every January I should just set aside a little bit of time for the investigation that inevitably comes out of Christmas parties gone wrong. And there's certainly less of that. There is still, there's still plenty of other concerns about harassment, retaliation, and discrimination going around. So I would not say that the hybrid or virtual life has eliminated it all.
That's an interesting outgrowth. We noticed last summer, as New York City started opening up more, a little bit of an influx of some more of the sort of sexual harassment type matters coming back.
Yeah, you often have to be in the same room for it to be an issue, but not always.
Exactly. Well, I think people also, they've been cooped up for so long and they forget how to interact
That's
in the
right.
workplace a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
just like all the teachers are saying in the classrooms, right?
oh, yes, that's a whole other issue.
That's another podcast.
So are you a member of any sort of bar associations or employment law groups or other ways of staying in touch with employment lawyers, locally, or how does that really work?
Yeah, this is something that I'm looking to develop even further. But there's a really well-established HR organization, SHRM, Society of Human Resources Professionals, and I'm getting more involved with them, and really looking forward to sort of digging in a little bit more and seeing myself again outside of the role of just sort of working in a law firm, but instead being a member of the legal community. So that's something I'm looking to. It's great personally as far as being enriching. It's also great as far as networking is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you said it before, and it's definitely, I think, correct that our business is about relationships, and so the more relationships you make, the better your business is going to be, and the more enjoyable actually the practice of law is.
Absolutely.
So, you also have a life outside of work. You mentioned a couple of kids.
I do.
And how old are they now?
I've got a 16-year-old who's in driver's ed and a 13-year-old who's about to get his braces on. So we're in it. We're in the teen years.
In the thick of it.
Absolutely.
My oldest is 14, so I'm right there with you, and she still has the braces on. And then I have a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. So
Rosanne,
I'm going to be in it for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we all have these challenges, right? We all have to balance. How do you find that you balance it best? Like, what are your, do you have any tricks or tips or anything about how to keep all the trains running on schedule?
Well, I think anybody you ask says, I'm not sure that I do. I'm not sure that I do, but we're all like, if we're all out of the house in clean clothes, like it's a win for us. But no, I mean, I think a lot of it is not sweating the small stuff when you can, not assuming that if I'm not doing it, it's not that I have to be the one doing things for my kids, or it won't be done right. You've got to give up some control, and know that there are benefits associated with getting them to do more things on their own and taking more responsibility for themselves. Like, I think as a working mom, my tendency is to want to make up for the fact of working by doing more for them. And I look at my sibling who is an educator, married to an educator, and they are very successful in, teaching their kids, and not underestimating what your kids can do and getting them to do it and be more independent at a younger age. And I think there's value to that, and value to them seeing that you are working and that it's important and that you're contributing and it's helping provide for their life. And just sort of setting a role model for them, being a role model for them, and doing that in some ways unapologetically as well.
I love that. That I subscribe to that entirely. I think I'm definitely guilty as well of feeling like you need to make the extra pancakes on the weekends, or
for sure, right?
Whatever you can do to try to make up for the fact that you're not always there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're down to our last 3 questions. These are
excellent.
Meant to be a little bit rapid fire. They
all right.
Turn out that way.
Noted.
I'm not sure that they were just written correctly for that purpose, but give it a try. So if you couldn't be an attorney, what career would you choose?
Well, you probably could guess. I would be a writer for sure. I would love to write. I would love to blend it. Like, I'd love to write on the court system, or something that's nonfiction. And I would love that, or editing as well.
Do you ever try to carve out time for that now? I know that it's hard.
More so now. I'm trying to do it more now. Yeah, but it requires a level of sort of like creative, thought and freedom that is not necessarily conducive to like fitting it in. I know that great writers just get up every morning and just do it, like the people go to the gym. Yeah. And that's probably something that I need to get more in touch with.
Be intentional, right? That's the word that you use.
That's right.
Okay, second one. What is the one thing you wish you knew when you graduated law school that you know now?
That is hard. And well, this might be obvious to some people, but I think so this advice is not for them when this is obvious. But I think for a lot of people, when you come out of law school, you have you know a lot about the law, but you know almost nothing, unless you've had some amazing clinical experience. You know almost nothing about the actual practice of law, and it can be overwhelming. And you feel like everybody knows everything, and everybody knows more than you, and that can be, incredibly overwhelming. And I think that a mistake you can make is to assume that just because you haven't done something, you can't do something.
Mhm.
And I think that if you just push yourself, you build on the skills that you have, you trust in your ability, you can go extremely far and go further than you would have expected. So, just because you haven't done it doesn't mean you can't. There's always a first time for everything.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to do your first argument. You have to do your first.
You got to start somewhere.
Somewhere.
Yep.
I love it. And last question, would you recommend a law career to women considering law school today?
I would. I think that it is an incredibly rich field that can be almost any kind of job. And so, I grew up with a father who was not a courtroom lawyer, and I knew that there were he did regulatory work, and I knew that there were, so it was a very distinguished and important office job that was, had better hours than some other types of work. And I think that, it all depends on what you are looking for. For some people who don't want to have kids or aren't going to be the primary, breadwinner, it's even less relevant, like sort of what some of the demands would be. Our primary caregiver, I should say, it's sort of irrelevant what the day-to-day demands would be, and maybe they have the same considerations as men in the field. I don't know, but I do know that as somebody who's chosen to have kids and to be pretty heavily involved in raising them, there are ways. It may not be, working straight out, flat out at Big Law, but that doesn't mean that Big Law isn't good for you at some point and can't, give you a stepping stone to other things.
I think I subscribe to all of that. I think that's absolutely true. And I mean, I think what I learned in Big Law has carried me and made me a better lawyer than I would have been without that experience. But I'm glad that I didn't stay in Big Law while my kids were, young and growing up, because I think it was really allowed me out of Big Law to have the flexibility to really appreciate that time, which is a special time. And as we've talked about before, it's a transition, right? There's transitions in life, and being able to change your career to match your life is really a great benefit of having a law degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Amy, what's the name of your law firm?
It's Serino Law LLC.
Great. And that's where everyone can find you. And you're in Andover, Massachusetts. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
that's in the greater Boston area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And
thank you so much,
Rosanne. Talk to you soon on the other side.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.
You've been listening to Success in Brief with your host, Rosanne Felicello. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others. You can catch prior episodes at www.felicellolaw.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts,